Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll learn about functions. The following topics will be covered in this video. Since the first part of this series, we've actually been using many inbuilt functions of Python. Some examples are the print function and even the type function as well. So print function simply displays the required text or output. So that's the print function, and there's also the type function that we saw. So type function simply returns the data type of the specific input that we give. There are plenty of other inbuilt functions in Python which we will be exploring in later parts. But first, let's try and understand what a function does. In the context of programming, a function performs a specific task. This task is defined by a sequence of statements. So basically, in a nutshell, a function takes in an input, performs a task, and then returns the result. For example, in the case of the type function, we input any value and the function's task is to identify the data type of the value and return the class of the data type. So let's say we do type 100. This should return the value. We need to print this. So this should return the value saying class integer, as you see on the screen here, stating that the value that the user has input in the function is an integer. That's the purpose of this function, to try and identify what is the data type given by the user. So let's say I put this 100 inside quotation, then it's simply going to identify it as a string. So let's break down some common terminologies of functions. Once we have defined a function, that is, once we have created a function and given it a name, to use the function, we call the function by its specific name. So in this case, we have not gone ahead and created the function type. It's already an inbuilt function, but to call this function, we are simply going ahead and specifying the name of it, which is basically type. The input goes inside the parentheses, and that is called the argument. So the argument in this case is 100. It's actually very common to say that a function takes in an argument and returns a result. So in our example, we are going ahead and giving 100 as an argument to the function type, and the result that the function is spitting out is the data type that the user has given as an argument. That's the task of this function. Let's try and explore more inbuilt functions of Python. So we have a function called sum. This function sums the item of an iterator. So let's say we have a list of numbers and I need the sum total of all the numbers. I can simply pass the list as an argument and get the result. What I mean is, let's say I have a list called, okay, and now I want the sum total of all these values. So I can just go ahead and do print, and so I'm passing the list as an argument into the sum function, and the result will be 21. So it's just added all the values. We have another function called, let's say it's called the int function. It's in small case. So the purpose of this function is very simple. It converts either a number or a string into an integer object. So let's say I go ahead and I have a floating value number. Let's create a variable. Let's say I have the value of pi. Now the difference between floating value and integer is floating value has decimal points and integer does not have decimal points. Now if I want to convert this into integer, I just need to go ahead and pass this as an argument inside this function, and you see the result, it's printing it as 3. So it's basically cut off everything after the decimal point. It's just going ahead and printing 3 on screen. And that's it. And if I'd like to see what's the data type of this, I can just go ahead and put this as an argument inside the type function. Oh, my bad. So you notice it says class int. So this is basically converted. The floating value variable is actually converted as an integer in this case. Let's try another function called len. This function returns the length of any object. So let's say I have something like hello world. Okay, now if I want to know what's the length, how many elements are there in this specific string, I can use the length function to find out. So let's print, and as an argument I'm going to pass the variable message, and the result should be 11. What did I do there? Okay, so you notice it's 11. You might be wondering that it's only 10 letters, but in this case the space in between hello and world is also considered, and hence it's a total of 11 elements. This is the purpose of the len function. These are just a few random functions of Python I picked to demonstrate what functions are. If you like to explore more about functions, you can simply go to Google, do a search for Python inbuilt functions, and you will see a list of all the functions and what these functions also do as a task. And you can actually try and experiment them with your own inputs. Now let's say we have a Python file containing full of customized created functions, and we'd like to use these functions. It's very simple. We import the module using the import statement. So let's try and import the math module. So the math module actually contains all the familiar mathematical functions. So once we've imported it, it creates a module object named math. This module object contains the functions and variables defined in that module. To access one of these functions, we need to specify the name of the module and then the name of the function. So it goes like this. So it's math and it's separated by a period. This is called the dot notation. And then I mention the name of the function I'd like to use from this module. So let's say I wanted to go ahead and find the square root of a number. The function's name is called sqrt. Okay, and I can pass in the argument. The argument is essentially the number to which I want to find the square root for. Let's say I want to find the square root for 144. Now if I want to print the result, let's put this inside the print function. And now you notice that it spits out the result as 12, the square root of 144. Now if this is in the form of a floating value number. Now if I wanted the result to be in the form of an integer, I pass this expression inside the integer int function, sorry. So you notice that actually it's one function inside another function, which is again inside another function. So 144 is the argument to the square root function, okay, and math dot square root, which inside 144, that entire expression is an argument that goes inside the int function, and everything from int up until 144, that entire expression goes as an argument inside the print function. So this is how functions work. So you have a value, you input that value as an argument inside that function. That function does some specific thing, any specific task, and it spits out the result. It's as simple as that. Now, using the math module, I can also do a lot of other things. I can use constants like pi. So if I wanted to do that, so it's just math.pi. So it gives me the approximate value of pi. And let's say I wanted to calculate the area of a circle. I think the area is, if I'm not wrong, it's pi into r square. Okay. Now let's say I wanted to build this function. Let's say we have radius of 30. Now to calculate the area, it's math pi into radius square. So it goes ahead and spits out the area, which is 2827. Now suppose I wanted to go ahead and print the area without the decimal values. Let's say I wanted to just round it off up to 2827. What do? Put this inside int, and it takes out everything after the decimal value. The math module has a lot more mathematical functions, ranging from simple functions up to various complex mathematical computations like trigonometric functions, logarithms, hyperbolic functions, and many more. If you'd like to explore more and experiment with more of these functions from the math module, just simply visit the Python documentation and browse through the math module. I'll have the link to it attached in the description. Now that we have understood what functions are and what embodies an entire function, now let's try to understand how to create custom functions of our own. In Python, a function is defined by using the def keyword. Okay? Remember in the previous video, we saw the keywords of Python, which have special meaning and structure, and the fact that those keywords cannot be used as variable names. If you notice, def is one of those keywords. And the purpose of this keyword is to define functions in Python. So every time you are creating a custom function, remember that you start off by going ahead and using the def keyword. Okay? So let's see a simple example here. If I wanted to go ahead and create a function, I just go ahead and type def and my function's name. This could be anything. I can customize my own function name. Let's call this my func and parentheses and colon, and I need to pass statements. So the statement is essentially me telling what my function does. So let's say this is functions created. Now to go ahead and call my function, I need to call it using the function's name, and in this case the function's name is myfunc. So you see the result. This is a custom function created by the user. It spits out exactly what I told it to do. So it's that simple to create a function. There are few important points to note here. The empty parentheses indicate that the function doesn't take any arguments in this case. So most of the previous function that we had used, we had to input some kind of arguments, but in the function that I created, I don't need any kind of arguments, so I'm leaving that empty. Okay. And next thing, the indentation, or you see right after the first line, which is def myfunc, the next line print actually starts after some space, or in other cases we call them as indentation. Okay. This is not by accident. In Python, It is a syntax rule to indent while writing statements for a function. There is no limit on how many statements we write in a function. You can write as many as you want to, but in this example, I've just limited the function to just one statement. And finally, the colon is compulsory as well. So right after the parentheses, you notice I've put a colon. That's also compulsory in a function. So these elements are very important while defining a function. If we don't go ahead and either put our parentheses, the colon, or leave indentation while writing our statements, it will go ahead and throw us a syntax error. Now let's try to go ahead and create a function that takes in an input from a user as an argument. So let's call it again myfunc. So the argument that the user will be giving, that it goes inside this parameter called name. So let's break this down. So the following example has a function with one argument, which is passed into a variable called parameter. Okay, this function assigns the argument into this parameter called name, and when the function is called, it prints the value of parameter. It could be any value. In this case, let's just say I want to go ahead and put it as myfunc, and the argument, I'm going to give the argument as Yugesh. This Yugesh will be passed into the parameter that is name, and it will be displayed in the result. So you notice it just goes ahead and substitutes the value over there. So it says this custom function is created by Yugesh. Now, since this function expects the user to give an argument, if I go ahead and run this or call this function without an input, look at what happens. It throws us a syntax error stating that there needs to be one argument given by the user. And also, I can input any value into this argument. I've chosen to enter a string value, but I can also use either integers or floating values. So let's see what happens. So if I use an integer, look at what happens. It says this function this is a custom function created by 12. Or if I use a floating value like, so whatever value I give it, as an argument, it will just substitute in the place of the parameter over there. And also when it comes to arguments, I can add as many arguments as I want to. But to go ahead and separate it, I can do that with a comma. Let's see with an example. So let's say let's create another function called def custom. Let's say we have first name, last name. I'm just naming the parameters. You can also, the parameters, the name is completely up to your choice, by the way. And let's say age. So first let me create the function and I'll break down exactly what's going on inside that. Now this function, it takes in 3 arguments from the user. The first one is first name, last name, and age. And for my convenience, I've just named them as fname, lname, and age. The statements might be a little confusing to understand, but don't worry, I've just done string formatting here. I'm going to go ahead and impute a variable inside the string, and that is why I've done that. and the backslash and the n is used to indicate a new line in Python. Hence, the output will be displayed in two different lines. So let's go ahead and call this function now. So let's say I put my first name as Yugesh, and in this case, remember the order matters. So if I go ahead and put Yugesh, I'll show you what I mean by that. Age, let's say I put it as a number, sorry. Okay, so first thing what it does is it says hello, and it goes ahead and takes in my first name and then adds that with my last name. So it's just printing hello Yugesh Naidu, and next it displays the other part in the next line. So it says you are 24 years old. So here the arguments given were Yugesh Naidu and 24, and it's in the respective order. So let's say I went ahead and I put 24 over here, and Naidu, let's just leave it there. Let's say I put Yugesh over here. It's going to go and throw me error. The reason being, in this case, the first name and last name, if you had seen my previous videos, you see that you can't add a string and integer. Okay, that's the reason it's going to go ahead and throw me an error. So the first name and last name need to be either strings or they need to be numbers together. They can't be one string and one number. So in this case, specifically, the order matters. Now let's say I left all three as strings. Even the age factor also, if I'd gone ahead and input that as a string, this is how my result would look like. Hello Yugesh Naidu, you are Yugesh years old. That which doesn't make sense. Now let's say we don't know how many arguments will be passed into your function. Okay, so in that case, we add an asterisk symbol before the parameter name in the function. So let's say we create a function called def. Let's say we take kids names. So if I don't know how many arguments would be given inside this function, I would simply add an asterisk symbol and I'll mention my parameter name. So don't worry about what I'm doing. What I'm doing here is actually a for loop. I'll explain that. Again, I'm trying to do string formatting in this case. So in this case, I've used a loop in this function. Don't worry if you don't understand what's happening in the piece of code. I'm just looping through all the names that will be given as an argument by the user. So in this case, I won't be just giving in one argument. I'm going to give in multiple arguments. And if I want to loop in through each and every argument that the user has given, I can create a for loop. Now, these concepts will be covered in later videos, so don't worry about that. So let me go ahead and call this function. So let's say I'm giving more than one James or Harry. Now what I've told this function is, once I've given, let's say in this case I'm just giving 3, but let's say I'm giving 1, 2, 3, even multiple ones, I wanted to loop through each and every name and print the result saying your name is Yugesh, your name is James, your name is Harry. So I wanted to loop through each and every argument and print out the result. So you see the results? It says your name is Yugesh, your name is James, and your name is Harry. So we use the asterisk symbols if we don't really know how many arguments a user might give. This is what we call arbitrary arguments. Now let's say you don't know what the order of the arguments are. As in the earlier case we noticed that when I go ahead and Now let's say you don't know what the order of the arguments are. As in, let's say we create a function something like this. Employee data is our function's name. Let's take 3 parameters. Okay, so in this function we're just going to take the name of an employee, the employee ID, and his designation as an input. Let's say we print okay. Now in this function, once we enter the employee's name, his ID, and the designation, the output would simply say the employee's name is whatever name we've given, the ID so and so, and the designation as per whatever the user has entered. Okay. Now in this case, the order really matters, because now let's say the order to input generally should be the first the name, second the ID, and then the designation. But let's say I did the mistake of entering my designation first. Let's actually do it and see. Let's say I entered my software engineer in my designation first, then my name, and finally my ID. Okay, now let's see what the result looks like. So you see the result, it says my name is software engineer, and I guess I did a typo there, but yeah, it says my name is software engineer, my employee ID is Yugesh, and my employee designation is 349, which is absolutely incorrect. This is because I did not follow the order while inputting the arguments. So essentially what I should have done is put my name, my ID, and then my designation. Let me comment this out. Now see the result. It says employee name is Yugesh, employee ID is 349, employee designation is software engineer. Now this might be confusing in a lot of cases, okay? And this is when keyword arguments becomes very useful. We can input these arguments in the form of a key value syntax. So by key value syntax, we can specify each argument which is associated to the parameters, to the relevant ones. So what I mean is, let me even comment this out. So let's say I don't know the order. I don't know what order the arguments are supposed to be given. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll say the ID of the employee is 349. The designation is software engineer. And let's say name is Yugesh. So notice what I've done here. I have still not followed the order while calling the function, but what I have done is I have mentioned that each value I input is associated to the relevant parameter. So the function matches these key value pairs and spits out the result. Now let's see what the result looks like. Notice it's the same result. So the function will match that the name is associated with Yugesh, software engineer is for designation, and 349 is for the specific ID. So I haven't really gone ahead and kept the order in mind. So this is when key value pairs are very, very useful. Similar to arbitrary arguments, if we don't know how many keywords or how many keyword arguments will be passed into a function, we can add two asterisk symbols. So let me show you with an example. So earlier when we didn't know how many arguments might be passed into a function, we used one asterisk symbol. Now if we wanted to create a function with keyword arguments like what we just saw, and we don't know how many keyword arguments might be given, we add two asterisk symbols. Let's say we call this employee names. Okay, and let's say we have the result print. So let's call our function. So let's create one key called first name. All right, and let's create another key called last name. I can create more. I can create something like age is 45, sex is male. I can create. So I don't know how many, keyword arguments are being given, and that's the purpose of this function. So in this case, if I want to, I can loop through all of this, but for just to simplify our example, I'm saying for this function, just pick out the last name of the employee which is entered by the user, and in this case the last name that was given is Thomas. So see what it says. It says the employee's last name is Thomas. Now suppose if I modified the function to say the employee's last name, let's just say age for example, it would go ahead and say 45. So this is the purpose of arbitrary keyword arguments. Suppose we have a function which, let's say, requires an argument. But in cases where we call in the function without an argument, it will throw us a risk. It will go ahead and suppose we have a function which requires an argument. But in cases where we call in the function without the argument, it's just simply going to go ahead and throw an error because it needs some kind of input. So in such cases, we can actually set a default value for the parameter. So let's say it's called my func. Okay, and let's say in this case I tell the default the parameter is name. Okay, pass. Let's say print. Let's do some formatting here. Next line. Okay, so let's say we're creating a simple system where the user inputs their name and we display a message saying, hello, whatever your name is, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Okay, now let's try and call this function. And I'm not going to input any argument, although it requires. It threw me an error. Now this is the cases where we can go ahead and set a default value for the parameter. So when no argument is passed, it will go ahead and substitute the default value. So let's set a default value. Let's call this sir, ma'am. So let's keep it generic. So notice I have not passed in an argument, so it just goes ahead and uses the default value. So it says hello sir, ma'am, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Now if I go ahead and specify an argument, let's say Yugesh, it says hello Yugesh, I hope you're having a wonderful day. So this is the point of a default argument. Return is another exclusive Python keyword. The return statement is basically used if we want the function to return a value. Very simple. So let's say I create a function that says func x. So let's say it takes the input or the argument x. Let's say I wanted to return x plus 5. Okay. So in this function, whenever the user inputs an argument, it's going to go ahead and add the result with 5. So when I run the function, okay, first let me show you. So let's say I input the value as 5, the result should be 10 because my argument, which is 5, is going to be added with 5 again. But notice the result is not displayed on screen, although Python evaluates the expression. To display it, we need to go ahead and outright mention saying print. So it prints the display, so it prints the result as 10 here, and this could be any value again. So the point of the return function is it doesn't necessarily go ahead and display the result, but it will return that value. The interpreter will go ahead and evaluate the entire expression, whatever is given over there. And if I didn't want to go through the pain of stating print over here, I could have just gone ahead and directly done print. So you notice if I just run the function, it just directly goes ahead and displays the result over here. But in some cases, especially when we are working with algorithms, we don't want the result of every step to be displayed at a point of time. So we just need the values to be returned so that it can be fed into the next step. So that is when return becomes a very, very useful method. Previously, we created functions by using the def keyword, and we used to call the function by its name. In Python, an anonymous function means a function without a name, and the lambda keyword is used to go ahead and define an anonymous function in Python. Now we'll be creating functions using the lambda keyword. But there is one key difference while creating a function basically by using the lambda keyword. So this lambda function can have any number of arguments, okay, no limit, but it can only contain one expression. You cannot do more than one expression. So that's the difference between creating a function using the def keyword and creating a function using the lambda keyword. So I'll show you with an example. So if I want to create a function using the def keyword, let's say def func x, okay, and return x plus 10, okay. So this function I'm just creating where once the user is given the argument for x, the value of that is going to be added with 10, okay. I'm not going to run this. Now let's create the same function using lambda. So let's call this lamb func. Let's put this inside a variable. So it's got one argument is x, and the expression is x plus 10. That's it, my function is created. Now let's see the results of both these functions. So let's say this is func. Let's put the value as 25. So the result should be 35. Okay. Now the result should also be 35 in this case as well. And how you do that? Lamb func, and the input that I'm going to give is 25. Notice the result is 35. So the functions behave the same way, okay, but the way you go ahead and define the function is entirely different. And one main difference for the lambda function is that you can go ahead and use as many arguments, but the expression is only one. So again, to explain that to you, in this case I can do return 10, and I can go ahead and write more expressions, more statements into this. Like let's say I type print hello, and let's just put this also as print for now. So I've written two statements. Okay, so the result for the first function is, so here it says print hello and then print x plus 10. So it says hello 35. Now in the case of lambda, I can only use one expression at a time, but I can use as many arguments. So what I mean by that is, let me comment this out. So I have one argument here. So let's say I wanted to use another argument called y, another argument called z, okay, and let's say the expression is x plus y plus z. This is one expression, and thus I can only limit a lambda function to one expression. So let's say I wanted to do this, I have to input three arguments, 25 plus 25 plus 25. So the answer should be 75 in this case. So this is what a lambda function is. So you can have as many arguments as you want to, but just one expression. And you need to remember this while creating lambda functions, because if you don't, you will just end up with a syntax error on your screen.
That's the end of part 3 of the series. Stay tuned for the next video in the series. We will learn about conditionals, Boolean, and logical operators in Python. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Have a good day.